for me to people who come in behind you. We are excited the fact that our group on our monthly basis just seems to be growing and growing and growing. And for that, we're very grateful, and we're wondering, we're hoping that it's because that we're trying to put together some really good programs for you. But we need your help. A lot of you are waiting to the very last minute to sign up. Some of you signed up today. And this hotel isn't really happy about that because they do like to know how many tables and chairs they need to put out, and they need to know how much food to have prepared. And the deal we have with the hotel is that the Friday before our meetings, we let them know how many of you are going to be here. And I'll have you know that since we gave this hotel that number on Friday, 35 of you have signed up. So in order to encourage you to sign up more timely, we are going to have to institute some new little rules. Number one is when you get the invite, it's going to tell you that you need to have signed up by the Friday before. If you don't, the price tag to be in this lovely room and participate is going to jump dramatically. I apologize for having to do that to you, but I hope you understand why. And there's so many things, we're putting together name tags because we want to be able to call each other by name and not be like me because I can't remember anybody's name. And so there are a lot of things that go in, just all the handouts that we have for you. We want to make sure that there's enough of them. So again, if you could indulge us and try to cooperate and get signed up earlier than 10 minutes before we start, that would be great. So just a couple reminders. On the 25th of September is our fiduciary attorney mixer. You guys should all have received information about this, been encouraged. We have a large contingent of attorneys that have signed up to attend. Evidently, everyone seems to be interested in wine pairings and beer pairings, and it's going to be a great night, I think. It should be a beautiful night outside on the harbor. So if you're not signed up for it and you are a fiduciary or an attorney, we encourage you to sign up. If you don't have information and you need some information, I'm going to ask my board, most of which actually is sitting out front. And then we have Dion, who's over here. If you need information and you don't have it, seek one of us out and we'll make sure you get it. The next thing I want to tell you about is in December, instead of having a meeting, we are going to do an outing out into the community. I think we mentioned this a couple months ago. We're going to be going into St. Paul's Senior Center on Wednesday, the 11th of December. We're going to go there during their lunch hour, and we're going to do a holiday sing-along with them. We plan to bring some trinkets to just make it more a holiday spirit. We might have some Santa hats and some beads or lights that light up, but we're hoping that you can join us. You'll be getting more information about that. We'll be wanting you to sign up, and that what we plan to do is treat anybody who shows up to some lunch at a pizza or some sort of joint afterwards that's nearby so that we can just have a good time together. I want to tell you about our next meeting. Our next meeting is actually a two-parter. It will cover October and November months. You should have a yellow sheet on your chairs. We want to give you advance notice every month. We're going to try to make sure you know what's going to go on next. Shannon Stein and Kristen Shepard, who are with Goodwin Brown, are going to be talking to us about trust. They're going to be helping us with our vocabulary so that we understand what different types of trust mean and what they do, why they exist, what their purpose is, what the tax strategy is. This is all really important information for us as fiduciaries as we are administering these trusts post-death. We make sure that we are taking the appropriate steps. And that our accounting procedures and the distributions that we're making are appropriate given the type of trust that we're administering. So that will be October and November. That is a boatload of material for us to cover. Let's see, where am I? So I'm going to, without further ado, we're going to start. You know that our meetings each month, we have sponsors, and we need to be really grateful to these businesses that have stepped up and been sponsors for us. They are the reason that we are able to come here monthly and that we are able to keep the cost of our being here at the low rate that it's at. So today we have Valerie Medina from Trust Properties USA, and she's going to be followed by Jamie Dominguez from Grossmont Escrow. So we've got the woman who's going to sell the real estate for us, followed by the woman who's going to get us through the escrow process.
Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie Medina. I'm a broker associate with Trust Properties USA. Thank you very much for having me. I'm here to talk about how we can be a resource for you because we add value to you and your clients' probate and trust estates. As you probably know, some of your clients are left with estates in disrepair. The kitchen looks like it's from the 1940s. The person who passed perhaps was a hoarder. Maybe there are some family members moving into the home and not moving out, and the family doesn't know what to do. Due to the condition of the home or the circumstances surrounding the estate, many families are left fire sailing the home to a lowball investor, leaving the equity the family worked a lifetime for on the table. Well, we are the one call solution. For any contingency you can think of, we've seen it. We have the processes and procedures in place to provide a solution. We specialize in probates, trusts, conservatorships, and guardianships. We've sold over 500 probate and trust estates, and we are A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. Have any of you heard of Trust Properties USA? We're everywhere. We cover LA County, Ventura County, Orange County, San Diego County, and coming soon to Palm Springs and Riverside County. This is our whole team. Joining me today is Maya, our operations manager. Okay, I don't see that slide. Okay, so let me tell you about what we do. We are unlike any other realtors. At zero upfront cost, we fix up the family home, so instead of a buyer or investor making the profit, the family keeps all the equity. The average estate loses $20,000 to $100,000 of potential equity just because the home is sold in its as-is condition. So here are just some of our services we offer that we call our family fix and sell strategy. We take care of trash outs and estate sales, evictions and lockouts, abandoned car removal, rekeying and security measures, fronting mortgage payments to prevent foreclosure, all at zero upfront costs. We don't file a lien against the property. We don't charge any points or interest. The only fee we make is the same fee you'd pay any other realtor. We get paid through the close of escrow. So take 2135 Tulip Street in San Diego as an example. The trustee wanted to sell the home, but it had deferred maintenance and was a mess from family members living in the home. When the home was vacated, it had furniture and personal belongings inside and out of the home. The trustee wanted to do right by the deceased relative and hired Trust Properties USA to clean out and repair the home. The former trustee was a military veteran, and the trustee wanted to honor him in the sale of his home that he had lived in for more than 30 years. That's where we came in. We put in over $64,000 out of our pocket to put the home in top fair market condition. After we were paid back through the close of escrow, the family gained an additional $52,748. Wow. So let me ask you a question. Can any of your clients benefit from an additional $52,000? Here are just a few samples of our 5-star reviews. You can also read reviews from our satisfied, thankful clients on our website. And thank you very much for listening. If anyone has a problem estate or you have a family that needs help, let me know. I will take care of them and give you, I'll make you look good and make the client extremely happy. Let's work together. You're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, I will be here at the end of the meeting. Thank you so much.
And now, Jamie, where's Jamie? Here she is. This is Jamie from Grossmont Escrow.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie. I'm with Grossmont Escrow. We have been located in La Mesa for 67 years. And as I've told some of you that I met, I'm the newest member at Grossmont Escrow, and I've been there 22 years next month. So we have a lot of experience going on in our office. Turnover is not high. We're centrally located just off the freeways, the 8, and we're all over San Diego, Riverside, or we service, I'm sorry, all over San Diego, Riverside, San Bernardino, Los Angeles. We handle a lot of probate and trust situations. Karen Baird, who was supposed to be here today but couldn't make it, is really our resident expert on the trusts and the probates. And I've also got Zona Weekly here with me with Tycor Title, and she is amazing whenever we have any issues, as I'm sure you guys have come up with going into escrow and there's deeds or there's mortgages or liens that you didn't know about. We're able to handle all of those situations. We're very big on keeping up to date on all of the regulations and further educating all of our employees and the owners at Gross One Escrow. When opening the escrow, once you hopefully maybe have it with trust properties, and then you open it over at Gross One Escrow, the biggest thing we need right up front is the signing authority. We need to know who can sign for the trust, who can sign as a conservator. So getting all of that necessary paperwork to us up front so that we can move forward and order the liens and order all the payoffs that you need so we can get this escrow closed for you. Again, we've been working on these types of escrows for over 40 years. We've seen our fair share of scenarios. We've had a lot of messes. We have some that go smoothly, but I'd say 80% of them do not. So they're fun. We're also very good at knowing who to call, how to get the answers on any of these problem situations, which really do arise quite a bit. We also understand the sensitivity of these transactions. We're very good at keeping the confidentiality in our office and also prioritizing our file as to what needs to be done first and who to contact. So I would hope that if you have a probate sale coming up or a trustee sale, that you would give Gross One Escrow a call. We'd love to work with you. Thank you.
Okay, and now on to the main event. Today our speakers are Rixie Hernandez and Greg Borowski at Brierton Jones & Jones. You can just sit right there for just a second. Yeah, I know what I said. Just sit right there. So rather than bore you with all of their professional credentials and all the awards they've won and why they're so special as lawyers, I thought I would tell you a little bit about them just as human beings. So I'm going to start with Rixie. Would you like to join us? Rixie grew up in Oakhurst, California. It's an area, I didn't know where that was. Evidently, it's near Yosemite. She went to Yosemite High School. She was on the women's golf team. Who knew? She came to San Diego to attend UCSD. She was going to be going into the biochemist major. She quickly discovered that wasn't her world. She moved on to political science. After graduating from UCSD, she remained in San Diego and attended Cal Western Law School. Having grown up in Yosemite area, it's no surprise that Rixie enjoys the outdoors. She likes to cycle, she likes to camp, and she enjoys spending time traveling the globe and trying new restaurants. If Rixie seems familiar to you, you may have run into her in a couple different spots. Some of them were being her pre-lawyer jobs. Okay. So as a high schooler, she worked as a junior park ranger at Yosemite, where she greeted park guests and answered questions. She's worked as a hostess at Donovan's Restaurant here in San Diego, a specialist at Apple, a librarian, and a court clerk in the probate department here in San Diego. So to sum Rixie up, she can help you with your golf swing, provide travel tips, fill you in on the new best restaurants, tell you what not to miss at Yosemite, and point you in the right direction. And if that isn't enough to make her special, if her job experience is an indicator, she's a polite greeter. She's good at answering questions. She can fix any of your electronic devices. She can help you find a book, and she can help you with your probate court pleadings when you run into trouble. That's Rixie. Next we have Greg. Here we have Greg. Greg grew up in Poway. He attended Poway High School. He was on the tennis team. After graduating from San Diego State, he headed to the East Coast to attend law school at St. John's University in New York. In November of this year, Greg and his wife, Erin, will celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. Greg and Erin have 2 children, Evan, age 8, and Alice, age 5. At age 14, Greg began his illustrious career. He began as a janitor at a grocery store. He went on to be a pizza delivery boy, a headhunter for an insurance agency, worked a bit as a mortgage broker, and then interned in the probate department in New York. Today, Greg enjoys working out at the gym. I mean, look at him, you know that, right? He's routinely there at 5 o'clock in the morning, a routine he has increased to 6 days a week to combat his cholesterol problems.
Unsuccessful.
And as he just mentioned to you, he has just recently discovered that after a year of this regime, hasn't been any better for him. Didn't make a dent of a difference. And he went vegetarian and he went to 6 days a week. Yes, it's frightening. He enjoys gardening. Who knew? Yankees baseball, time with his family, coaching his his son's little league baseball team, and playing on a co-ed softball team that evidently he tells me he has been 12-time champions of what, I have no idea. And to top it all off, he enjoys matching his socks to his tie. So you can check that out later. So let's sum up Greg. You can count on Greg to provide tennis tips, clean up a mess, provide service with a smile, deliver things on time, find the best person for the job, to be well dressed, and to explain things in a way only an 8-year-old could understand. Greg, go.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn, for that amazing introduction. I'm sure I'll never receive another similar to it. This presentation is all about boundaries, the boundaries of your authority in various capacities. We intended initially when we started preparing for this to go broader than we're going to be able to go. Today, we're going to focus on your appointment as conservators of the person, the estate, as personal representative in a probate proceeding, and a few different key scenarios as trustees of the trust. We could present this over a 5-day period. There's a lot of information, so we're going to be moving briskly. Please hold your questions to the end. I mean, we could do days just on the boundaries of your authority as trustee. So again, we're just going to focus on 2 areas that are near and dear to our hearts that we thought would be of particular relevance to you and something we see pretty frequently. So we're going to present the material in various fact patterns that hopefully, well, at least they're intended to sound familiar to you, and hopefully they'll resonate with you a bit the next time you see something similar. We're going to begin with a conservatorship fact pattern related to Eleanor. Eleanor is 89 years old. She's been diagnosed with moderate dementia, or now I believe the DSM refers to it as major neurocognitive disorder, or MND. I don't know that I'm going to be consistent with MND. I may slip back into dementia, but it's a synonym for dementia anyway. Eleanor wanders around the house a little bit, and she can't perform her ADLs, her activities of daily living, without assistance. She's widowed. Her husband died about 10 years ago. Eleanor has 2 children. We have Blaine, the cliche unemployed son providing caregiving services there on the left. And we have Walter, the successful Goldman Sachs financier who lives in New York with a spacious condo and countless maids and servants. Eleanor's assets are pretty straightforward for our purposes. She has cash investments in $20,000 denominations, checking, investment, IRA, home in San Diego, vacation home in Palm Springs, and a vehicle. Okay, we're going to focus now on your appointment as conservator of person. The BAM is intended to be a reference to your superpowers as fiduciaries. So you have been appointed conservator of the person. At the end of your handout, you have a list of the vanilla default powers that come with your appointment as conservator of the person. So those are there, and the other fiduciary capacity default powers are also going to be at the end of your handout, and you don't need to refer to them now. They were intended to be a handy reference for the future. In addition to your default powers, you've also been appointed with authority to make medical decisions for Eleanor pursuant to Probate Code 2355, which I'm going to discuss in a little bit more detail in a moment. While Eleanor is currently prescribed medication for her cholesterol, arthritis, heart disease, and diabetes, the first question I want to pose to you rhetorically, please, is should you have any concern filling her prescriptions at this point with 2355 medical consent powers? And quickly, because we're going to do a lot of these rhetorical questions, the answer is no. Because you have 2355 powers, you have authority to consent to her medical treatment to fill her non-psychotropic, mind you, prescriptions. So you do have authority to fill these types of medical prescriptions. We're moving on to an ethical point, because I understand you're receiving ethics credits. No ethics credits. So all of these ethics points are just bonus for you. They're just going to make you better people. Okay, well, here we go anyway. So we're going to sprinkle these throughout the presentation. They all stem from California Code of Regulations sections, so we'll refer to that as CCR. But this one in particular relates to 4478 and 4480. And they provide that a fiduciary has an obligation to make a good faith effort to ascertain the desires of a conservatee when making decisions. So yes, you are the fiduciary, everything begins and ends with you, but you do need to consider what your conservatee thinks. So let's keep Eleanor's preferences in mind as we look at a few scenarios. We call this wandering incident number 1. Eleanor doesn't have, I mentioned she wanders around the house a little bit, but who doesn't, depending on the time of day. Blaine calls you. Recall Blaine, the caregiver, son from the couch. He calls you at 2 a.m. and he tells you the police are at the residence because Eleanor was found wandering in the middle of the night. She insisted that she was visiting a friend, but that friend passed away long ago. So that this is obviously a nightmare scenario for any fiduciary. And the question is going to be, what do you do about that? Well, you can address the wandering through informal means initially. Do you consider alarms, cameras, inside locks on the door? No, definitely not inside locks on the door. That's a fire hazard. But you can take steps to monitor. You can talk to Blaine, who's purportedly providing caregiving services, and put an alarm on the door. Again, because this is really the first instance, you're probably not going to want to yank Eleanor out of her longtime home. Probate Code 2352.5 actually mandates that you keep Eleanor in what is considered her least restrictive appropriate residence. And there's no doubt that that is her home under this circumstance. Scenario number 2, we're going to fast forward a few months after these informal measures have been in place. Things are getting worse, it seems, because Blaine calls you again and informs you he took mom to the grocery store, and while he's reaching for some frozen pizzas, he turns around and mom's gone. He's running around through the grocery store, can't find her, finds her in the middle of a busy parking lot. So now there's real imminent danger at issue here. So now we have that stepped up element of anxiety. And what actions do you consider taking now under this scenario? Well, recall you were appointed as conservator person with 2355 authority to make medical decisions for Eleanor. Utilizing that authority the best action you could probably take now is to bring Eleanor to her physician, get a referral to a neuropsychologist, and get a neuropsychological examination on her to see how far her dementia has progressed, and really to get some referrals from a medical professional. You're going to ask the neuropsychologist to complete a capacity declaration. Showing of hands, who's familiar with the capacity declaration form? Okay, a good number of you. The capacity declaration form is a document that is completed by the physician and filed with the court because it is the primary source of medical evidence that the court receives before it makes a decision as to whether a request for increased medical authority should be warranted and granted. So here, the neuropsychologist completes the form, gives it back to you, and it indicates that Eleanor's dementia has progressed. She requires placement in a locked or secured perimeter facility. She also requires the administration of what's referred to as psychotropic medication, such as Aricept, for the treatment of her dementia. The physician thinks perhaps that will stem the wandering to the extent she's already in a secured perimeter facility. This brings us to another ethics point. So you're appointed, if you were only appointed as conservator of estate, not as conservator of person under this scenario, and you're scheduling medical appointments and making medical decisions, there's no question that you are acting outside the scope of your authority. You have crossed a boundary. CCR 4470D is quite clear. So if you're a conservator of estate, you have no authority whatsoever to be making Eleanor's medical decisions, and that's foreshadowing for some issues we're going to approach in the near future.
So as Greg has said, you now have a capacity declaration that reflects Eleanor's least restrictive placement is a locked or secured facility. So you have a few options here to address Eleanor's wandering. Do you, 1, place her in assisted living? 2, Walter, her wealthy financier son in New York, has offered his home for you to move her to New York, given Blaine's lack of supervision of Eleanor, and he thinks he can do a better job of watching her. Or 3, do you place her in a local secured perimeter facility? So let's go over the options here. 1, your first option is assisted living. Assisted living is generally non-secure facilities. You have that authority to place Eleanor in a assisted living or residential facility under Probate Code Section 2355. It's inherent in those 2355 powers. However, as Greg has mentioned, Eleanor has been wandering, she's high risk, and you also have a capacity declaration that states that the least restrictive placement for her is a locked facility. Therefore, placing her in assisted living might not be the best idea because 1, you have a capacity declaration that supports a locked facility, and 2, she has a history of wandering. So if you place her in an assisted living or you leave her at home and she wanders, you might be concerned about your liability in making sure that Eleanor is safe and being cared for at her residence. Option 2, again, Walter wants to move Eleanor to his 8,000 square foot Manhattan home. He has countless maids and servants. He thinks he can do an absolutely better job than Blaine in watching her. Eleanor doesn't want to move to New York. She hates New York winters. She wants to stay here in San Diego. She was born and raised here. As the prior ethics pointed out, is you have a duty to find out what Eleanor wants to do. So Eleanor has enough capacity to tell you that she doesn't want to move out to New York. So option 2 might not be the best option because 1, Eleanor doesn't want to move to New York, and 2, is Walter's home in New York the least restrictive means? Again, you're going to have some issues with wandering, and now she's wandering in New York City, and who knows what kind of trouble Eleanor can get in there. So 3, the third option would be to place her in a locked facility. You find an affordable locked facility here in San Diego. The capacity declaration supports it. It helps curb her wandering. What do you do now? Do you immediately place Eleanor in the locked facility once that there's an opening? The answer is no, not immediately, because you do not have authority to place Eleanor in a locked facility without prior court authority. Under 2355, you have authority to place her in a unsecured perimeter facility, but if you want to place her in what's called a locked facility, you need prior court authority. So you contact your lawyer and you ask him or her to prepare a petition requesting authority for placement in a locked facility. Once you have that court order, then you have that authority to place Eleanor in that locked facility. As Greg stated, along in the capacity declaration, the doctor recommended not only placement in a locked facility, but the administration of psychotropic medication for the care and treatment of MND. So Eleanor's doctor has prescribed Aricept, which again is a common psychotropic medication. Can you immediately go to the pharmacy and fill her prescription and begin administering Aricept? The answer is no. You also need court authority prior to administering psychotropic medication for the care and treatment of MND. So again, call your lawyers, have them petition the court for authority, and once you've obtained that authority, then you can begin administering that psychotropic medication.
Okay, now we're going to move towards conservators of estates. You have now been appointed conservator of estate. The default powers associated with that, again, are at the back of the handout. We're going to start with an ethics point. When reasonably necessary for the benefit of the estate, CCR 4482 provides that you have ethical obligations to do the following: protect the assets, pursue claims, defend claims, incur appropriate expenses, manage the assets of the estate in the best interest of your conservatee, and to manage the estate with prudence, care, and judgment, maintaining detailed fiduciary records. Again, the caveat to those are those obligations spring when they are reasonably necessary, and you've concluded therefore the benefit of the estate. So let's consider those obligations in the context of your authority to disperse Eleanor's assets in a few different scenarios. Specifically, we're going to examine your authority to pay Eleanor's expenses, to pay an allowance to Eleanor, and to pay different types of fees. So beginning with expenses, generally, you have the authority to pay Eleanor's expenses and debts that are incurred in the collection, care, and administration of the estate, pursuant to Probate Code 2430. So you can pay Eleanor's bills, but can you give her cash? Eleanor likes to go to bingo with her girlfriends. She likes to go to Starbucks. What else does she like to do? She likes to go antiquing, shopping. It makes her feel good, and you want to foster a feeling of independence for Eleanor. You want to keep her in the least restrictive, appropriate circumstances, but you can't just give her cash. You can't just give her an allowance. Despite the fact that I see it quite frequently in conservatorships of estates, the code actually requires you to first obtain specific authority before paying an allowance to the conservatee, and that makes sense because before the court would appoint you as conservator of estate, the judge would have had to have made a finding that she lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs. So why are you giving her cash? So that is something that would routinely be requested in the petition which requests your appointment. You could just tack on a request for that authority. Or if it's something that you want to do later on, you could ask for it the next time you're in a court on an accounting petition. But there is an ethical obligation also to determine, if you are going to give her an allowance, that the allowance being paid is appropriate in amount and it's going to be used for a reasonable purpose. You want to make sure she's also actually using it for that purpose, so that if you're giving her $100 a week, she's not just giving it away or leaving it on a street corner. Next, let's look at your ability to pay fees in different scenarios. So in looking through Eleanor's records after you've been appointed, you find out that she hasn't paid her taxes since 2016. Do you have authority to retain and pay a CPA? Yes, absolutely. CPAs, you can pay like most of Eleanor's expenses. Another ethics point, 4470E of the CCRs indicate that you have an obligation to seek professional advice. While you may prepare your own taxes using TurboTax, if you're not a tax professional, you shouldn't be preparing Eleanor's taxes. That's a bit of self-dealing there. And also, you're not, again, a qualified professional, so why would you open yourself up to that liability? Seems like a bad idea to me. Attorney's fees and costs. Okay, your attorney sends you a bill now that you've been appointed. The attorney knows you have access to the money. You've opened up a conservatorship of estate account, and the bill reflects the attorney has incurred $7,000 in fees to get you appointed, maybe a little high, and $1,200 in costs. Can you pay those fees and costs? You can pay the costs. Maybe the $1,200 relates to the court investigator's assessment. That's $800, letters, court reporter. But you can absolutely reimburse the attorney for his or her hard out-of-pocket costs, but not the fees. Absolutely not the fees. A fiduciary, a conservator, requires prior court authority before he or she can pay her attorney's fees, and that's going to take place in the accounting petition a year after you're appointed. So we're all waiting. We're all going to wait that period of time. And how about your own fees? You've incurred fees and costs. Can you pay yourself those fees now that you have access to the conservatee's assets? It's exact same result as with the attorney's fees and costs. You can reimburse your costs, but you can't pay yourself fees until a court first approves those fees. Again, usually in the accounting petition. How about caregivers? We've established that you can retain caregivers. Blaine's taking care of Eleanor. He's been doing this for the past year or two without receiving compensation. Maybe he was kind of taking money from Eleanor on the side, but he's no longer managing her finances, obviously. You are. And he's demanding a caregiving salary now that his income has dried up from you. We've established that you have authority to retain him as a caregiver. 2355, again, authorizes you to make medical decisions for Eleanor. That includes implicitly the authority to choose and retain caregivers. And obviously, you can pay him because you're managing the purse strings. If you are only appointed conservator of estate and not conservator of person, you would have no authority to retain Blaine. You would need to find alternate authority, somebody else who has the authority to make that type of personal care decision, like an attorney, in fact, under an advanced health care directive.
All right, so now you have Eleanor in a nice secured perimeter facility. It's about $10,000 a month. You're doing your best to keep Eleanor there. She's happy with the administration of the medication. She's less angry, less likely to wander. She loves this place. However, you don't have enough liquid cash to continue paying for Eleanor's care at the secured perimeter facility. So what do you do now? You think about selling her tangible personal property or any other cash accounts that she may have. So as you recall, Eleanor has a vehicle, some investments accounts, and an IRA. Can you sell Eleanor's vehicle to help pay for her secured perimeter facility? The answer is yes, but only if the aggregate sum of all the tangible personal property that you sell is $5,000 or less a year. So if her car is worth $4,000 and you're only selling the vehicle for that year, you can sell it without prior court authority. However, if the car is worth $4,000 plus you sell something else that's $1,000 or more, and that aggregate sum that one calendar year is more than $5,000, then yes, you're going to need court authority before you can sell those assets. So again, the key number here is $5,000 any calendar year for tangible personal property. If the vehicle alone is $6,000, you're going to need court authority. So just make sure you're looking at the sum, the aggregate sum of all that tangible personal property that you're attempting to sell. Eleanor has some investment accounts. You have limited authority. You want to keep those investment accounts so that way it can garner additional interest and income for Eleanor. So you decide to keep those and you're making a determination of what to invest in. So under Probate Code Section 2574, that code section lists your authority to invest in stocks and bonds on behalf of Eleanor. Specifically, you don't have the authority under the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, as you do as a trustee, to invest in those types of stocks and bonds. You don't have authority to invest in mutual funds or bonds which mature later than 5 years, because those aren't included in 2574. If you'd like to expand your investment authority or invest in other stocks and bonds that are not listed in 2574, you're going to have to seek court authority for that and call your attorney to get that authority to invest in those types of assets. So now you also have Eleanor's IRA. Can you maintain Eleanor's IRA and receive her required minimum distributions? Yes, you have that authority as conservator of the estate to obtain, continue, modify, or otherwise deal with her retirement plan for the protection of Eleanor. If you're thinking about liquidating her IRA, please speak with your CPA and think about any of the tax liabilities in liquidating that IRA for Eleanor. So after going through her tangible personal property, you determine that that's still not enough money to keep Eleanor in her facility. You recall that Eleanor has a vacation home in Palm Springs and her real property here in San Diego. It's unlikely that Eleanor will return to her personal residence here in San Diego. The vacation home in Palm Springs, Eleanor hasn't been there in 3+ years. It's sitting there vacant, incurring liabilities such as taxes and insurance. It's subject to vandalism, and you decide it's probably best to sell the vacation home rather than rent it out. So can you sell Eleanor's vacation home in Palm Springs without court authority? The answer is no. You need court authority to sell Eleanor's non-principal residence unless you initially on the onset obtain 2591 powers, which are independent powers upon your appointment to sell Eleanor's house without court authority. So you've sold the vacation home in Palm Springs, now moving on to her residence here in San Diego. Can you sell Eleanor's residence here in San Diego, or can you think of alternative options to make it productive? A first thought is maybe you want to mortgage it and get liquid cash for mortgaging the property. Do you need court authority to mortgage her house here in San Diego? Yes, you do. You decide you don't want to mortgage it, and let's say you want to lease it. Blaine, I don't know where Blaine got the money, but he thinks he can lease the property from you. You agree to lease the property to Blaine. Can you do that without court authority? It depends. If Blaine's lease does not exceed $5,000 a month and does not exceed more than 2 years, then you can lease it to Blaine without court authority, or alternatively, if it's a month-to-month lease, regardless of the amount that you're charging Blaine, you can do so. So if you're renting the house to Blaine for $4,000 a month for a year, that's fine, no court authority needed. You decide you want to, fair market value for rent is $7,000 a month, you can do that, but it has to be month to month. So you lease it to Blaine for some time. Blaine actually can't afford to lease the house. So then you decide to sell it. Can you sell Eleanor's personal residence without court authority? You do need court authority to sell her house, similar to her residence in her vacation home in Palm Springs. You're going to need court authority to sell her house unless you have independent powers to sell it without court authority. Now, on to one of my favorite subject topics, the substituted judgment doctrine. So, who's familiar with substituted judgment? All right, so the substituted judgment doctrine allows you to step into the shoes of Eleanor. You essentially can request court authority to take a number of options that Eleanor would take if she had the capacity to do so. Change beneficiary designations, it's a number of items you can do. It's most often used for estate planning purposes. So the substituted judgment doctrine is commonly used to either create an estate plan for Eleanor or to fund an already existing estate plan. So let's say Eleanor doesn't have an estate plan. She has no will, she has no trust, nothing. And you as conservator of the estate are managing her financial affairs. you can petition the court under substituted judgment to create a pour over will and create a trust, and then transfer the assets from the conservatorship of the estate into the trust. And in this case, the purpose of the substituted judgment is Eleanor will likely pass away with assets more than that $150,000 probate threshold limit. So it's a probate avoidance avenue. So that way you can create the trust, fund it, and then when Eleanor passes away, there's no need to go through a probate of probating her assets. So you believe that's the best thing to do. You petition the court under the substituted judgment doctrine. You can request the court appoint you as trustee of the trust. In the court-created trust, it is subject to the same rules as the conservatorship of the estate. So you still have to serve with a bond, file annual accountings, and the trust is still under the court supervision because it's created under the court. So now let's say Eleanor already has an existing trust, and for some reason, those assets were never transferred into the trust, and you're managing those as conservatorship of the estate. Under the substituted judgment doctrine, you can petition the court to transfer her already existing conservatorship of the estate assets into the trust. But because Eleanor already has an existing estate plan and it's not a trust created by the court, it won't be subject to court supervision. And there won't be the requirements of the annual accounting, things like that. So now let's say you've done the substituted judgment, all the assets are now in the trust. Do you, as conservator of the estate, terminate the conservatorship? Remember, Eleanor has an IRA, so the IRA can't be transferred into the trust unless you liquidate it and take those cash assets and put it into the trust. So that's a consideration that you'll have to think about, whether or not you'd want to terminate the conservatorship of the estate. Is there any likelihood that Eleanor will come into any other assets? Because if you're no longer conservator of the estate, but only trustee, are there any other financial assets that you have to manage? And with liquidating the IRA, in my personal experience in court, the judge will have you strongly consider whether or not keeping the conservatorship of the estate open is worth it in order to keep that IRA in her individual name, or do the tax ramifications of liquidating it outweigh the expenses associated with the conservatorship of the estate? You have annual accountings, attorney's fees, court costs, things like that. What are her required minimum distributions? What is she taking? Is it worth it to keep it open? So those are just some things to consider. And in the annual accounting, the court may likely ask you that of why are you keeping this conservatorship of the estate open if everything else is in trust? All right, so now we're done with Eleanor. So we're going to say bye to Eleanor and hello to Theodore.
Yeah, just as you're getting used to the fact pattern, we're going to give you a new one. So now we are in the probate context. Theodore died intestate. He has 3 children, Jaden, Michael, and Derek. He has a home in La Jolla, cash, investments. Importantly, he has a business, Cupcake Partnership. He makes cupcakes at a cupcake store. He has personal property in the form of jewelry, a vehicle, and some outdated furniture. And he has a significant liability because prior to his death, a customer slipped on some errant frosting and hurt herself, and now he was being sued at the time he died. So you have a pending lawsuit. You've been appointed as Theodore's administrator, the administrator of his estate, rather, with full IAEA authority, Independent Administration of Estates Act authority. Again, the default powers associated with IAEA authority is at the back of your handout for your future reference. But we're first going to look at your authority to run Cupcake Partnership, the business. Theodore was a general partner of Cupcake Partnership. You do not need any special authority from the court to run Cupcake Partnership. You already, having full IAEA authority confers that enough authority on you where you don't need to get a specific court order, and you also don't need to give the heirs, Michael, Jaden, and Derek, what's called a notice of proposed action. Another showing of hands, who is familiar with a notice of proposed action? Most of you, but I'm gonna waste your time a little bit for those who haven't heard of it. A notice of proposed action in the probate context is a piece of paper, it's aptly named. You are providing folks with a notice that you intend to take action in 15 days, and the form describes the actions you intend to take. So in this case, you don't need a notice of proposed action per se, but if you did, you would tell the heirs that you intend to run Cupcake Partnership. There are 3 different things that can happen once the heirs receive this notice of proposed action. If all of them consent, all 3 sign the back of the form that indicates they consent and get that back to you or the administrator, you can take that action prior to the expiration of the 15-day period. On the other hand, if any one of them object, you can't take that action unless you go to court and obtain a specific court order. So it gets more difficult. And you probably want to think about whether you really want to take that action, knowing that you're potentially going to get objections in court. If nobody does anything, they don't object, they don't consent, and the 15-day period expires, then you can deem the non-objections as implicit consents and move forward with the action. So that's the notice of proposed action. We'll refer to that frequently throughout the probate part of this presentation. We'll refer to it as a NOPA. So the NOPA procedure is generally considered preferable, as you'd imagine, to obtaining court order for 2 reasons. One, you're authorized to take the action if there aren't objections after 15 days, whereas how long are you going to wait for the court? 3 or 4 months, probably. And then also there's an expense element, because the cost to prepare a NOPA, I mean, that might take your attorney an hour, whereas the cost to prepare a petition and serve it and prepare for the hearing and attend the hearing, it's going to be thousands of dollars to go to court on a similar issue. So notice of proposed action is a less formal, less expensive, easier way to obtain authority to take the actions that you need to take. So again, relating that to Cupcake Partnership, let's say that the 3 heirs tell you they want you to sell the partnership. Do you need to go to court to get an order from the court to authorize you to sell? You can sell the business without going to court and getting a court order, as long as you give the heirs the notice of proposed action first and no one objects. Well, what if you're unable to sell the business and the heirs change their mind now and it's turning a good profit now that you're running it, whereas Dad was getting kind of old and maybe not paying as much attention to it? Well, then you're likely going to need to manage that asset longer than 6 months. 6 months, I skipped over. That's kind of the magic period where you don't need a notice of proposed action to run the business. But if you're going to run it longer than 6 months, here through the end of the probate proceeding to distribute it to the heirs, then you are going to need to send a notice of proposed action to the heirs, which indicates that you intend to run it for that period of time. So now that we've handled the business, so to speak, what should we do with this personal property? Recall that the assets are jewelry, a vehicle, and some valueless furniture and furnishings. So we're going to apply those 3 categories of assets to your ability to sell them, abandon, discard, donate them, or distribute them. The heirs have informed you that none of them are interested in the vehicle, as is typically the case. They'd prefer that you sell it, liquidate it to cash, and distribute the cash to them at the end of the probate proceeding. Here, there are certain circumstances in which you can sell the vehicle without first going to the heirs and having them consent to a NOPA. And that is if the asset is perishable, it will depreciate in value if it's not disposed of promptly, or the estate will incur loss or expense if the asset is kept. Does our vehicle likely fit this description? Well, it's not milk, Marilyn. It's not that perishable. It may depreciate in value a little bit over the course of a year. I mean, how much? Over a year long probate. Okay, I'll give you that one. It'll depreciate in value. Is there going to be loss or expense if it's kept? Yes, because you're going to have to store it somewhere and encourage a storage fee. We'll debate about the perishable aspect of it. But I mean, administrators do often sell these vehicles without giving a notice of proposed action to the heirs. And that that will be a decision left up to you. But now you know the rules. How about the old furniture and furnishings? The cost to maintain and safeguard these items exceed its value. Again, that's typically the case. Are you authorized to direct the liquidator when trying to clear out the property so you can sell it to just abandon these assets? That's also typically what happens. However, under Probate Code 10513, you have to give a notice of proposed action before you can either abandon or direct the liquidator to abandon or discard that personal property. And you're only authorized to even go the notice of proposed action route when the cost to maintain these items exceeds its fair market value. Again, that's not a big hurdle typically with tangible personal property left in the house. But that begs the question, what if the value of the property exceeds the value to maintain it? Well, then you can't use a notice of proposed action to abandon the property. You wouldn't want to abandon the property and subject yourself to liability. You should attempt to sell it, which would require, again, the service of a notice of proposed action on the heirs. Turning to the jewelry. Michael, one of the heirs, approaches you and says, I'm interested in this $20,000 in jewelry. More specifically, my wife is interested in this jewelry, and I've talked to my brothers. They're okay with me getting it as part of my distributable share. Can you just give it to me? The answer is no, you can't just give it to him, not without the NOPA. And only then you can do it after the time for filing creditors' claims has expired with the probates. Creditors won't be injured by that preliminary distribution because the estate is solvent. And if the cumulative value of the assets you will make preliminary distributions of does not exceed $50,000. So here, if there aren't going to be any additional preliminary distributions, and the jewelry is only worth $20,000, then you can distribute the jewelry to him, make a preliminary distribution, because it's under that $50,000 threshold. If it's going to exceed that, then you would need to go to court, file a petition, and ask the court for authority to make that preliminary distribution.
So at Theodore's death, there was that slip and fall incident. So now you're going into this probate with some pending civil litigation. Can you just step into Theodore's shoes and continue on with the litigation without notice of proposed action or without court authority? And the answer is yes, you can continue the litigation. You can retain civil counsel, who will answer, defend the claim, and you can also enter into some sort of settlement agreement should you decide to settle the case. So with any pending litigation or actions against or by the estate, you can do that without a NOPA or without prior court authority because you have that IAEA authority. Now, regarding leases, Theodore has that house in La Jolla, and Derek, one of his sons, wants to continue residing there. We have a lot of children here who, live in their parents' house and want to stay there. So the two brothers contact you. They don't like Derek just living in the house, not paying rent. Derek is aware of this. Derek tells you that he's fine paying rent. Can you rent the house to Derek? And what actions do you need to take? So yes, you can rent the house to Derek. Besides having him sign the lease, you don't need a NOPA so long as the lease is not more than 1 year. Hopefully you can get the probate administration under a year. In the unlikely scenario, it's more than a year. Then you're going to need that NOPA from all the other beneficiaries in order to lease it to Derek. So let's say it's going to be a quick probate. You don't need to lease the property, but you want to sell it. None of the beneficiaries want the house as their distributive share, and they'd rather have the cash. So you call up your favorite realtor to put the house on the market. Your realtor wants you to enter into an exclusive listing agreement. Can you enter into an exclusive listing agreement with your real estate agent or broker? The answer is yes, and you don't need a NOPA or court order for that. That's inherent in your IAEA authority. So now you and your broker have that exclusive listing agreement for 90 days. Again, each exclusive listing agreement must be for a period of 90 days. He or she lists the property on MLS, it's on Zillow, there's open houses, you're doing everything you can to market the property. do you need to take a step further and do a publication in the local newspaper for the sale of the property and publish a notice of intent to sell? No, not if you have IAEA authority. You don't need to take that additional step, and there's no requirement for publication for the sale of the house. So now you've listed the house, you have a buyer, the appraisal's $2 million, and you have an offer for $2.1 million. You accept the offer, you want to accept the offer and close escrow. What court authority do you need to do that? You don't need court authority to accept the offer. You enter into a probate purchase agreement. Let me be clear, a probate purchase agreement, not any other residential sale agreement, because the probate purchase agreement has specific language that's needed regarding the NOPA if a beneficiary objects. So you enter into the sale, and then you are required to provide a NOPA to the beneficiaries regarding the terms of the sale. After that, if they all consent or after the 15-day period without objections, you can close escrow. Should there be any objections, then you have to go to court to confirm the sale, which is a whole nother CLE and very interesting process for the sale under court confirmation and overbids. So now we're going to talk about family allowances. So Jaden, one of the sons, lives in LA. He is an aspiring model, and dad Theodore has paid for everything his entire life. Theodore is requesting you for $10,000 a month to maintain his lifestyle in Los Angeles. Can you pay him that $10,000 a month? Well, you can. Although family allowances are perhaps most often paid to minors or children with who are incapacitated, as long as an adult child is dependent on his or her parent for support, then you can pay the family allowance. So in this case, Jaden has been supported by Theodore his entire life. And so you can pay the family allowance to Jaden for 12 months if you give a NOPA. However, you have to give another NOPA if the period for payment is more than 12 months, or if you want to increase that family allowance. So let's say in this case, all his brothers are supportive of his modeling career and think he's going to be successful. So you can pay the family allowance if they all agree. Now I'm going to move over to Greg to talk about trusts.
In our final segment, we're going to examine the boundaries of your authority while acting as trustee. And to the extent this presentation is focused on these boundaries, the best place to look for those boundaries is in the trust itself. Trusts, in speaking with fiduciaries, lay and professional, I oftentimes hear some hesitancy to review the trust. It's in legalese, it's difficult to read and understand. And that's certainly the case for, I mean, even if you're an attorney, the older trusts are difficult to read. But I would strongly suggest that you consider reading them yourself. After you read a few of them, you'll recognize that a lot of them are extraordinarily similar. They're going to tell you who the settlor and the trustor is, who the trustee and successor trustees are, who the remainder beneficiaries are, who are going to receive the assets on the death of the settlors, and will, most importantly for these purposes, what your authority is as trustee, because not every trust is drafted the same, and some trusts are going to give you really expansive authority, and other trusts are going to require you to go to court because it's not clear whether you have authority to do something or not. So again, read the trust, please. In our trust fact pattern, we have settlor Susan. Settlor Susan has capacity. This fact pattern is going to be flexible. So this is a starting point. We're going to end someplace much different. But at this point, she has capacity. She's wealthy. She's 75. Her spouse died years ago and he managed all of the financial affairs, and now that he's dead, she just doesn't want to bother with it. So she's hired you, you're managing her financial affairs. You are trustee Tracy. You not only are serving as trustee, you are also the attorney in fact under the durable power of attorney, so you have authority to manage all of the non-trust assets. The other party to this scenario is daughter Darcy. She is Susan's sole child. She is the sole remainder beneficiary, and she is also the attorney in fact under Susan's advanced healthcare directive. Let's go to fact pattern 1. Susan, under the trust, as settlor, is the sole individual authorized to revoke the trust. Susan also, that power of attorney I described, which names you as attorney in fact, it's a springing power of a springing power of attorney, which also, very importantly, authorizes you to revoke the trust. Because it is a springing power of attorney and Susan has capacity, you do not have authority to take any action under that durable power of attorney, not until 2 physicians indicate in writing that Susan lacks capacity. And that hasn't happened yet. So, under this easy fact pattern where Susan is competent, who do you account to? Well, you're going to account to Susan. She's competent. She has the authority to revoke the trust, and the trust remains revocable. These are key elements under Probate Code 15800. And there is an ethics point here where the trustee has an ethical duty to guard against the disclosure of Susan's personal information. That disclosure has to be limited to what is lawful, necessary, and relevant to the issue being addressed. So what does that mean for you? It means that if you disclose Susan's personal information, if you give the accounting to the wrong person, you are exposing yourself to liability and you are breaching your ethical duty to Susan to keep her information private.
So moving on to a different fact pattern, Susan has met pool boy Paul, and Darcy approaches you, daughter Darcy approaches you and said she's concerned that mom has been spending a lot of money on Paul, given Paul's statements of getting the new iPhone and new video games, all these fun things that pool boy Paul is getting. Darcy asks you for information and asks you for an accounting of what her mother is spending her money on. She's wholly concerned and just doesn't want her mom to be taken advantage of. Do you as trustee provide this accounting to daughter Darcy? No. Susan is still alive and has capacity. The trust is revocable and your duty is to Susan as the settlor. So no matter what Darcy's concerns are with pool boy Paul, you cannot provide the accounting to daughter Darcy.
Fact pattern 3. Okay, we're going to fast forward 5 years. You have been distributing during this 5-year period of time $20,000 to Paul each month at Susan's direction. Susan has capacity. You have some concerns about distributing that amount of money, but you've sat down with her and she appreciates Paul's companionship. She understands that she might be taken advantage of a little bit, but she knows what she's doing and she directs you to do it. So you've been doing it for the last 5 years. But now Susan's been diagnosed with dementia. Darcy obtains 2 physicians' letters utilizing her authority as agent under the Advanced Healthcare Directive to get those letters. And they indicate, each physician indicates, that Susan no longer has the capacity to manage her financial affairs or to revoke her trust. She wasn't managing her financial affairs anyway. But Darcy's learned now that mom was directing you to distribute some sum to pool boy Paul. She doesn't know specifically how much you were given, but she wants to know. She has concerns. She might bring an action against Paul, an elder abuse action. So she wants an accounting from you. Can you give her an accounting under this scenario? Susan's incompetent, remember. The answer is no, you can't. You have to decline to give it to her because the trust remains revocable. Who has the power to revoke if Susan's incapacitated? Well, you do, as agent under the durable power of attorney. Recall that the durable power of attorney conferred upon you the authority to revoke the trust. It is now sprung into effect to the extent we have 2 physicians' letters, so you can now act under that. So there is still an individual with authority to revoke the trust. That means you can't give Darcy the accounting.
So we're going to move on to a parallel universe where there is no power of attorney, but all the other facts remain. Susan is still 80 years old, diagnosed with dementia, and has been telling you to make distributions to Paul for $20,000 a month. Susan has a $1 million IRA and taking minimum required distributions. Thus, the court appoints you as conservator of her estate. So you are trustee of the trust and now conservator for Susan. Darcy, still being concerned with pool boy Paul, asks you for an accounting. Can you as trustee provide that accounting to daughter Darcy? The answer is no, because you as conservator of the, no, because the trust is still revocable. You as conservator of the estate would have authority to amend or revoke the trust under the substituted judgment petition. Therefore, Susan's trust is technically still revocable.
All right, moving along, fact pattern 5, we're getting more fraught. There's no power of attorney, there's no conservator, all the other facts remain. Susan's incapacitated, they're the physician's letters, she can't revoke the trust, she can't manage her financial affairs. Darcy still wants to bring that elder abuse action against Paul. Surely you can provide the accounting to Darcy now, right? Well, consider the following. Is the trust irrevocable? Susan's still alive. There's no conservator though. But there could be a conservator in the future who would have authority to revoke the trust. Does Susan have capacity? No. Again, she can't personally revoke the trust. Consider Probate Code 16062, which is quite clear that a trustee has a duty to account solely to individuals who are entitled to income and principal distributions. Well, who's that? It's only Susan. Nobody else is entitled to income and principal distributions. But contrast that with the estate of Drawden case, which muddies the waters a bit and indicates that daughter Darcy, following Susan's death, has the standing to bring an action for you for your breaches of trust during mom's lifetime, before she was a vested beneficiary. So does that weigh in favor of you giving the accounting to Darcy to start a statute of limitations on which she would have to object? Maybe. This is all a risk analysis at this point. I'm not going to wind this up with a clear answer. You're going to weigh the family dynamic. If Darcy's been friendly to you and you think, she's on mom's side and there's nothing iffy in that accounting, then, maybe there's no problem with doing that. But don't forget that there is another option, usually less favorable option, and that's the court. You can file the accounting with the court and have the court absolve you if that's any concern. You can also simply file a petition for instructions with the court and ask the court to whom you are required to account and obtain an order that indicates that you aren't required to account to Darcy if you don't think that she's going to be friendly to you. Again, not a lot of great answers in fact pattern 5, and the case law is not extraordinarily clear on that point either.
So now in another parallel universe, Susan was incapacitated, you were agent and conservator, but now Susan is dead. Darcy, as the sole daughter and remainder beneficiary, requests an accounting. Can you now provide an accounting to Susan? Yes. Darcy has passed away. Susan has passed away. Darcy is now the beneficiary of the trust and is entitled to the accounting. Pool boy Paul thinks he's a beneficiary and also wants an accounting. Can you provide him with a copy of the accounting? No. Although the trust is irrevocable, Paul is not a beneficiary and thus not entitled to any information or an accounting.
So the two scenarios we wanted to touch on with the limited time we have when you're acting as trustee, one's obviously that accounting exercise. The other is a frequent scenario where there's the need for somebody to bring in caregivers. And under this scenario, we're going back to Susan being alive. Her physicians have indicated that she requires caregivers. There are no other siblings. Darcy isn't around to provide that care. And we're going to discuss your authority to hire caregivers in your capacity as trustee. So many of the experiences I've had in representing fiduciaries, again, lay and professional, are that there are scenarios where there are no agents under Advanced Healthcare Directive. There is no conservator of person. The doctors say there needs to be caregivers, and the trustee is going out and finding caregivers to fill that need and is paying the caregivers. There's no question that the trustee has the authority and is well within his or her boundaries to pay the caregivers, to compensate the caregivers. The issue we want to focus on is whether the trustee has authority to retain and to go out and find those caregivers. And we think in most circumstances, the answer to that is no. We say review the trust, but most trusts don't confer upon a trustee the authority to make personal care decisions. So in the absence of that authority for a trustee to make personal care decisions, who's going to make that decision? Well, Rixie?
You're going to have to look at some alternative options if the trust is silent on that, because you need someone who has that authority. The first option is look to the Advanced Healthcare Directive. Hopefully, the settlor has also execute an advanced healthcare directive, and in that case, it's no question that whoever the agent, I'll say generally, most of the time, the advanced healthcare directive, read the document, confers upon the agent the power to make healthcare decisions. In the scenario with Susan, it's more likely that daughter Darcy, as agent under the advanced healthcare directive, has the authority to make healthcare decisions instead of you as the trustee. So Darcy would be the one to make the appropriate decisions in mom's care. And ideally, she's the one that engages and finds the facility or caregivers, and you as trustee simply pay for those services. Option 2 is the conservatorship of the person. If a conservator has been appointed for Susan, the conservator of the person would be the person who has the authority to make those healthcare decisions, only if they've been conferred the 2355 powers to make healthcare decisions, which include retaining a caregiver. From a legal perspective and from a practical perspective, a conservatorship of the person just to retain caregivers might not be the most practical. However, understanding that it's expensive, however, someone needs to make healthcare decisions for this individual. And again, only a person who is the agent of the Advanced Healthcare Directive or the conservator of the person under 2355 would have that authority to do so. And in this scenario, there might be it might be a case where a conservator of the person would be needed to make any other healthcare decisions. And that essentially concludes our presentation.
So hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to guess some of you might have questions. So we can take a couple questions right now, and then they'll be here that you can ask questions of them later. I'm sure they're happy to answer questions. Remember, Rixie is quite experienced, having worked at Yosemite as a guide. She can answer your questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll let them pick you. And then if you would for us, repeat the question so everyone can hear it.
Sir. Correct.
Would you object to the idea that maybe you got on the psychotropic, maybe the wandering would go away and then she could remain in her home?
So the question is for the audience at home, whether the conservator of person should consider obtaining authority to administer psychotropic medications to Eleanor in the conservatorship context prior to trying to place her in, or going straight to placement in a locked facility. And I would say, yes, absolutely, that would be an appropriate decision for our fact pattern. We're trying to, make the most we could. Area. The statement is that we don't want to sedate her, from my partner Geraldine Jones, into oblivion. No, of course you would want, that would be an integral part of your job as conservator of person, not to overly sedate somebody. Diane Peters.
So in Eleanor's situation, if you're appointed as the conservator of the estate and you're trying to inventory, you discover that she has assets outside, investments outside of the or
No, you have authority to continue to keep the assets as you find them. 2574 limits your ability to. The question is, if you find that Eleanor, again in the conservatorship estate context, has assets that aren't consistent with your authority to invest under 2574, if you can keep those assets, or if you have an obligation to perhaps liquidate those and then invest in something that is consistent. And the answer is yes, you can keep the assets as you find them. You don't have to immediately liquidate them. There could be serious consequences for that, capital gains taxes and that sort of thing. But the 2574 limits your ability to take cash and then invest. And it's really it's an outdated law. And speaking with financial advisors through the years, I think 2574 is over 30 years old. And in different contexts, the courts, they're completely familiar with the code, and they're completely willing to consider expanding your authority to invest under the UPIA and give you authority as a trustee if it's necessary to generate additional investment income for some reason. That's something we routinely do in special needs trust contexts. When you have a younger beneficiary, it's maybe a harder sell for the judges in a conservatorship context, where really your job is to maintain the status quo and safeguard, and the assets are probably depleting at the end of somebody's lifetime. Yes, Stella.
We'll bring this to you so you can keep on the WebEx.
Okay, thanks. Yes, you mentioned on Eleanor that the caregiver, Blaine, could go ahead and get paid. But as a conservator, wouldn't we need to make sure that this person qualifies as an employee, do the proper background check to protect her estate? Or do we just, you're saying we can just go ahead and pay fees on that?
Did the question get back to the audience?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't repeat the question then. Then absolutely, yes. I could go and approach it from an employment law standpoint, where you would definitely never want to 1099 a caregiver. You would want to have a caregiving agency employed to provide some protection from liability. You'd want them W-2ing Blaine and to make sure that he's providing appropriate care. We were a bit flippant with our facts pattern. Marilyn.
Can you speak to, in the context of a special needs trust, the trustee's ability to make decisions that might be healthcare related or living arrangements and those types of things?
Okay, in a special needs trust context, again, you have to read the trust. The trust is going to be likely more expansive with regard to a trustee's ability to pay healthcare expenses, but does it go so far as to say you can make healthcare decisions? I do a lot of special needs trust law, and typically my trusts don't go that far. And typically the special needs trust beneficiaries' family members are conservators of person in that context, or perhaps if it's an injury that took place later in life that resulted in them needing a special needs trust, then hopefully there was an advanced healthcare directive. But that's something that's going to be personal to the trust and maybe less common than we would hope. Any more?
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. And don't forget, our next meeting is in October and November. There's a 2-part series. We're going to be talking about trust and the definitions. And please remember to sign up early. Thank you.
We did great.
I appreciate that.